Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. In this video, what I want to do is something that people asked me to do. I put out the call in my video when I reviewed the Team Avatar Tales Lost Adventures Omnibus earlier in the week. I asked, do you guys actually want to see me review the short stories from this book again? I haven't covered them in a long time, especially with the Lost Adventures. I don't even think I have a video directly talking about them, because I think we did that on a podcast quite a while ago, and people seemed to very much want that. So what this video is going to be is basically, it's the other side of the review that I did earlier on in the week that was talking about the edition of the book. We're actually going to talk about the content here. So we're going to talk about all the stories from Team Avatar Tales, The Lost Adventures, but I'm also going to include in here, just so we're relatively kind of complete, we're also going to include the 3 most recent Free Comic Book Day books, just because at some point in the future, these books will be collected into some sort of a book that is probably similar to Team Avatar Tales, and they'll all be in collected editions basically. Just before we jump in, I do want to mention that I do have YouTube channel membership enabled on the channel if you would like to help support. It's a really good way to help support the channel. There are 2 tiers available, the Light Spirit tier and the Avatar tier. Light Spirit tier is mostly just a support tier, but you do get access to the loyalty badges and custom emojis you can see on screen there. The Avatar tier is more expensive, but you do also get access to monthly exclusive videos that I put up on the channel. A lot of these are typically video game videos, but you will also get access to stuff like a lot of my live reactions to, say, Netflix Avatar. Season 1 is on there. Season 2, when it comes out, a lot of them will go up there as well. This month's one I haven't put up yet, but it's going to be, assuming I can record it all effectively, it's going to be probably some Mario Kart World kind of footage, kind of gameplay, along with kind of my thoughts on the Switch 2, because I did get a Switch 2. So that's going to be this month's exclusive video, but that is just available if you are a YouTube channel member, or if you subscribe on Patreon, which is also listed down below as well. But yeah, let's get into talking about this. So yeah, like I said, we're discussing The Lost Adventures, Team Avatar Tales, the Free Comic Book Day book from 2021, Matcha Makers, the one from 2023, Lost and Found, and this year's one, Ramen Rumble 2025. This means what we have to discuss today are 39 short stories of various lengths, which we'll get into, and we'll also note that 2 of these short stories are non-canon, and we'll highlight those when we get there. So realistically, it's 37 short stories overall, and again, 3 of them are kind of not currently collected and are only available via Free Comic Book Day, just to be aware of that. Again, at some point in the future, I assume they'll do another Team Avatar Tales, and we'll get these 3 collected plus some other stuff. So yeah, the way I'm going to do this is just, I have this kind of table here where I just have the books listed basically in order that they appear in the book. I have the page count listed on this side of the table, and I have some quick thoughts that I typed out as I kind of went through, and I'll give some more thoughts kind of just kind of speaking here as we go through. So of course we start with The Lost Adventures. This is the kind of first and earliest of the comics. Obviously The Lost Adventures itself came out in 2011, but a lot of these comics actually go back to like 2007, 2006, 2007. But still, very early comics that are actually quite old at this point. So we open up with Be Calm. Now, straight away, this is where we have to note the page count. This is why I have the page count thing here, because I think it's such an important thing to note when talking about short stories. Is that, hey, this is a 2-page comic. What do we expect it to be? In that, it's 2 pages. In this case, it's just Aang interacting with bees and other related animals, and just a little bit of chaos happening. There's very little substance to this story, but as a fun incident, moment, scene, it's fine. There's nothing particularly to praise, and there's nothing particularly to criticize, because there's only so ambitious you can be with a 2-page story. This one just in particular happens to be, I think, rather basic, so there's not too much to this one. I wouldn't say this is the best 2-page story, but again, there's nothing really to say about Be Calm. It's just there for the most part. Next, we have Water War, which is 4 pages. And I will say, the books that are 2 and 4 pages, I think in particular, are the ones where, like, it's such a small amount of pages, there's nothing to say. The next page count that we go up to is, like, a bunch of them are 6 pages. That's where it starts to open up and, like, actually we could do something with 6 pages. So just to be kind of clear on that I probably won't have too much to say either way on the 2 and 4 page books, but we'll get there. So yeah, Water War, Katara shows 2 pranksters not to mess with a waterbender. This one, like a lot of, I think, these short stories here, especially in, like, the Lost Adventures, the earlier ones, they definitely get the Avatar approach, humor, feel right, but there isn't really much here to talk about. There's no real details to latch onto in most of these stories. You know, it's some kid throwing water balloons. Katara decides, I'm going to take revenge with waterbending. That's it. The only probably notable thing here is that, interestingly, this is specifically placed in the Book 1 Water section of Lost Adventures, but the characters are wearing their Book 2 outfits, Katara and Sokka. Now, I'm guessing that's just a little bit of an error, but at the same time, it's also a book where, like, there's so little substance or connection to anything, it doesn't matter if this comic is set in Book 1 or it's set in Book 2. So, like, which do you kind of treat as being the case? Is it misplaced in Lost Adventures, or is the art wrong about what character design they're meant to have? Up to you, basically, because it kind of doesn't really matter that much. My guess is that Katara seems quite confident in waterbending. It maybe leans a little bit more into, like, maybe it's just misplaced within the book, but anyway. Don't Blow It is next, 4 pages. Definitely is one of those ones where it feels like, yeah, this is a book that would happen. You can maybe see a little bit of continuity here in that, like, is this Aang getting a cold post-Blue Spirit type thing after, you know, Sokka and Katara got a cold? But yeah, it's basically, you know, Aang gets a cold, sneezes. His sneezes are particularly explosive to a certain degree, so it draws a lot of attention. Again, there's only so much you can do here. A lot of these short stories for the early Lost Adventures are kind of like this. It's just something happens to one of the characters and they draw attention to themselves in a kind of funny, chaotic way, just slightly differently adjusted, basically. So yeah, it's fine, but there's nothing here. Then we finally get into the first significant comic. 10 pages, that's, you know, our typical free comic book day length these days. This is the first one where there's actually some substance, something to talk about, to dive into with. And the reason I have this one highlighted in yellow, all the ones highlighted in yellow are my top 10. Now, I don't really have an order specifically, it's just there are 10 highlighted in yellow. They're my favorite 10 short stories, and this is absolutely one of them. And this is actually probably super high up the list as well. I think this is a really standout Avatar short story because it doesn't have a ton of time to do everything it needs to do to be super in-depth as a story, but it covers a topic that we've rarely explored, and so straight away, that is something I look for in these short stories. Why are you telling the story? What is this story offering that hasn't been covered in an episode or another short story? Well, hey, we're covering some air nomad genocide related topics. It's Aang in early book 1 kind of tackling stuff that actually relates to the airbenders, to the air nomads. It's another good use of Zhao in an incident that happens kind of off screen in between episodes. This one actually really feels like a lost episode, a lost adventure, that this one could be transformed into an animated episode if they wanted it to be. And it's a really kind of clever story of highlighting that this is how the airbenders were hunted down after the initial attacks on the temples. That, of course, they weren't all just killed in those attacks. Some of them, of course, escaped. They're nomads. They weren't all at the temples. This is how they went about hunting them down, and this is how Zhao goes about hunting them down. And the fact that he actually decided to use this historical method to hunt Aang is quite clever, knowing that Aang would want to find information on his people. But then you get the more kind of fun Avatar aspect of Zhao then disrespecting the air nomad artifacts that he's using to hunt Aang down, and them being what Aang uses to escape and sort of defeat Zhao. It's a super start to finish, really nicely done comic where I wish there was kind of more to it, but as is, it's a really good 10-page story. So top marks on Relics so far. So then we go into some 2-page comics. So Fruit Stand Freestyle is a very brief Momo comic. Momo gets chased by a porcupine. That's it. It seems to be mostly a showcase of a kind of unique art style, and I suppose a fun comic where like, oh, it's just animals, there's no dialogue in it, but it's just 2 pages. It is what it is. Sleep Bending is, again, you can sort of see the idea, same premise as Be Calm and Don't Blow It, except in this case it's Aang bending in his sleep. Particularly note to Joaquim dos Santos on art, which is, I think, quite nice. And we'll talk about, I have a whole section on art kind of as we get a little bit kind of later on down the list. But just worth noting here that, hey, he does this quick 2-page story, and he's one of the more notable artists on Avatar, of course, working on the show as well. Lessons. I actually particularly note this one for being, in my mind, probably the best of the very, very short stories. It's only 2 pages, but actually they cover a lot here because it's basically Aang training with Toph, sort of the seismic sense training. That's really cool. There's a particularly nice panel where like it's Aang and Toph on the kind of surface in a forest, and it actually shows you the kind of different layers underground, kind of highlighting what they're trying to sense here. And then yeah, we have Sokka kind of interrupting them by like stomping around the place. It's fun, basic, but actually it's like, oh yeah, that's where they did the training for that, to set up Aang knowing seismic sense. Very, very cool. Then we go into Sokka the Avatar. So 15 pages, this one. So definitely the longest one so far, but it's not the longest in the overall collection, of course. So yeah, it's finally a page count high enough to actually have a full story that actually has like a subplot here where we actually set up the rough rhinos happening in a completely different scenario, and then they have enough time to enter this story rather than just like appearing out of absolutely nowhere. It's a fun story concept with, you know, Sokka trying to impress a girl by saying that he is the Avatar, and initially like Aang backing him up, but then Sokka's usual thing of going too far into it, letting it get to his head. He draws way too much attention in on himself. The rough rhinos attack, and it's his servants as the Avatar that have to kind of save him. And it's just a very fun one from the perspective of like the other characters being frustrated with Sokka taking this so far. And then if you do like the Sokka always having a lot of female attention dynamic, well, here's another example of him doing quite well with a girl. So that's that. Then we have Dirty is Only Skin Deep. 4-page story. Immediately we have to note very early Team Gurihuru art, because of course they go on to do the art for the first 5 comic trilogies, but this is where they got their start with Avatar stuff. And now it's obviously very noticeable here. Their very early stuff is particularly cartoony, chibi style, and it's incredible to see the evolution of their art from, you know, this stuff, their few stories in here, going into the Promise, and even how their art evolves from like the Promise all the way up to like North and South. It's really interesting to see their progress, but it's still super clean art. Gurihuru will always be one of my favorite Avatar artists, just because I really would like to see them come back and do more Avatar. I hope we do get to see that at some point in the future. The actual story here, there's not much to it. It's just, oh, Toph, you're dirty. We all kind of wash ourselves. Why don't you get in the water and wash yourself too? And it's just Toph being quite like defensive, kind of referencing a little bit of Tale of Toph and Katara. Just playing on that whole dynamic, and just that causes a bit of an issue. Just a fun incident style story. Again, it's 4 pages. There's not too much to really talk about with it. We then get into Divided We Fall, which is the second longest comic in the book, and actually has the 22-page count here, which means like it's effectively the length of a full comic. Most comics are like 20 or 22 pages, and this one's 22. And yeah, it has the time to set things up, kind of have a beginning, middle, and an end. The end reveal, I think, of the orphanage is actually a pretty nice, heartfelt moment to explain a lot of the misunderstandings that happen over the course of the book. But I will say with this one, this is where maybe the big page count works a little bit against it, where it does feel like this is perhaps a comic where for most of its time, I don't think it maybe uses the page count super well. It's a little bit bland until you get the reveal of like the orphanage, and actually that there's this kind of tragic aspect to it where even though you'd think during a war the orphanage would maybe have too many people coming in, because they're in a kind of isolated spot, the war is actually kind of preventing orphans from going to the orphanage, and there's a kind of tragic aspect to it in that way, where like there should be more kids there because of what's happening, but there isn't, and which is a little bit of an insight into the war as well. There's definitely, like, as you go through, some very fun art, some fun moments, like just as the chaos is about to happen, like Aang spots Katara and is just like hi, right as they kind of get hit and kind of crash land. So that's kind of fun. Next, Reach for the Toph, and this is one of the first times, I won't be saying this too many times in this video, I really don't think the art is super great here in this one. This is, I think, definitely the worst art probably in the whole book. I would say breaking it down a little bit more, mainly when it comes to just the construction of the characters. I think the bending, the way it's shown, is actually quite nice in this one, but yeah, the character work doesn't work for me at all. I would not like this art on like a full comic, absolutely not. Otherwise, it is just Toph being cool, you know, getting to spar against everyone and kind of coming out on top. It's just a very much like, okay, cool, you know, one of those ones. 4 pages again, so there's not too much to say. Then we get into the first of a trio of between book 2 and 3 stories that kind of bridge the gap and answer some key questions. So first up is It's Only Natural, which, as you can see here, it's in my top 10. 7-page story, but it's really, really entertaining because it's King Kwai, it's Bosco, it's giving you extra context on them, of like, oh yeah, we know that King Kwai kind of left and kind of traveled the world on his own. Here's the build up to that, and that like, oh yeah, Bosco doesn't seem particularly suited to that sort of a life. So here's Sokka trying to teach Bosco how to be a real bear. And even though it's a lot of hijinks and stuff that doesn't quite work, there's still that nice emotional core at the end as Kwai realizes that like, okay, it didn't work, but it highlighted how much I and Bosco have to learn, how spoiled we've kind of been. So I'm going to travel the world as a humble man and experience the outside world. It's a nice setup, and again, it's an example of a comic doing something quite important, filling in a gap, and I think that's really well done. Then we get into Going Home Again, which is probably the most like important of these ones here, whereas this is a little bit more like fun hijinks and it answers one question. Here's actually like really, really important context for this. It gives more context and time to Mei and Zuko's relationship. Instead, because if you don't read this comic or are not aware that this one exists, the Mei-Zuko relationship has been set up in the idea that, like, you know, childhood crush. And then in present day, you know that Mei still likes Zuko, but you haven't really got much on their dynamic, and so then you go into like the start of book 3 and it's just they're in a relationship. Like, they've already just met each other sort of off screen, and I guess it's just happened. Here's how that happened. And so yeah, it really helps to get the reunion here and to really highlight the idea that, you know, it's a like what actually makes Zuko eventually go with Azula to the Fire Nation is, in the end, what this book settles on is it's mostly about Iroh, even though I think Ty Lee and Azula think that actually Mei will be the thing to make Zuko make the decision. But it's kind of a mix of the two. Zuko reunites this kind of relationship with Mei, and it is quite important to him. You see how well they get on. But he's kind of even to Mei going like, I'm not sure I want to go, until he sees that, oh, Iroh's in a bad way. What if something happens to him? Zuko realizes, I can't like let stuff go unspoken. I have to speak to him. But there's a clear sense that Iroh and Mei are the two key things that kind of bring him back to the Fire Nation. And it sets up the idea that then when Zuko goes to leave, Mei is the only sort of maybe like regret about kind of the way in which he kind of feels he has to leave. So really good stuff there. And also, yeah, Ty Lee and Azula as sort of matchmakers for Mei and Azula and Mei and Zuko is actually really nice. You get to see Jin return in this one as well for a brief kind of cameo appearance. Very much highlighting that, like, you know, between the shippers, they're kind of very much going like, okay, you think that this is a really good relationship, but actually Zuko is into Mei. You know, that whole idea. You also get Judy in this one, which I think is a pretty fun dynamic as well. The last of the kind of 3 Bridging the Gap books is The Bridge. Really good, superb. Fantastic job about filling in a lot of gaps for basically the kind of hero squad in between the books. They give us a little bit of an insight into this in The Awakening, of course, but this gives you more details explaining the context and the build up to it rather than just a montage. Even though it's Katara kind of narrating this, Sokka actually really gets to stand out in this one because he is treated quite like, there's still a little bit of humor surrounding him, but he's ultimately treated quite seriously in the sense that he is part of like the leadership group here, and his clever ideas are a big part of how we create the good situation that the group is in as we start book 3 with the kind of chance to survive, basically. But the other side of it is definitely, yeah, Katara's strong emotions about not being able to heal and like properly help Aang in the situation that he's in. Her sense of kind of failure at this kind of early point. We get her reaction to hearing that the world thinks the Avatar is dead. And of course, we'll see Aang's reaction to that in the first episode of book 3 as well. So it's a bit of a perfect book 3 prologue. And again, these 3 together, like, this is a major part of why I always recommend people get the Lost Adventures, is if anything, just to get these 3 books, but then like it's these 3 plus relics and a couple of the other stories as well. So that's that. So then we go into Private Fire, which is the longest of all the comics. I almost forgot that this was the case. It is 24 pages long, so it's over the length of a typical kind of comic. So kind of getting into full-on one-shot territory almost here. But yeah, it mostly leans on comedy, but it's so good with the way it goes about doing things here, because they lean full on into the Wang Fire situation, but the setup with Sokka wanting to join the military to find some key information on the inside track into the Fire Nation is actually quite good. They kind of acknowledge that, like, did Aang in the school actually get us that much information? Well, maybe from the army we'll get some key information. They don't really settle on has he actually learned anything, but that's kind of part of the whole point of it. But yeah, I do think that this might actually be the best use of Wang Fire in the entire franchise. So I just love seeing like the training of Sokka as he goes through this. Completely failing. You do get the more serious moment where you find out that like this is a batch of kind of basically fresh recruits. They're not even that good, and they're about to be shipped off to the front lines. And there's that serious aspect of like Sokka's going to die if he goes out there, because they're not ready. This is what the Fire Nation is doing. This is again a big part of like Zuko speaking up was also about this sort of tactic that the Fire Nation uses, and Sokka was nearly a victim of it. So he gets out of it by basically, discovering the rebel benders, which are his friends, and staging this heroic fight where he kind of caves it in, he defeats the enemy, but Wang Fire is sacrificed in the process. And so yeah, his superior goes from not thinking much of him to thinking that Wang Fire is the bravest like soldier in Fire Nation history, to the point where Wang Fire in certain parts of the Fire Nation might actually be a legendary Fire Nation soldier. Now, I'm guessing post-war that kind of slightly changes. It almost brings up the idea of I'd like a follow-up book where like maybe Sokka goes to a specific part of the Fire Nation, and someone maybe recognizes him as Wang Fire in some way, and he has to deal with the fact that he did this previously in some way. But I don't know. It might be a tricky one to do, but still, fun story. It's in my top 10. because it's a little bit more on the lighthearted side of things, it's maybe not one of the absolute kind of top of that list, but still, it's very, very notable compared to a lot of the other stories here. Next up, we have Night Animals, which again is just quick, fun, Appa Momo incident. Not much to this one, where it's mostly just Appa scares away a soldier who gets close to them, and that's really it. Nothing really to say about that one for the most part, other than, hey, making use of the animals, that's cool. Next, we have a 6-page story, Boys' Day Out, which is basically the sequel to the tale of Katara and Toph, where that of course is Katara bringing Toph out for a girls' day out. This is more like they go out together just to kind of eat, just have a normal interaction, but they kind of have to dress up as boys to get into the place they want to eat, so Katara has to act tough, and she kind of takes it to heart a little bit too much, to the point where Toph is the one having to rein Katara in, and she causes too much chaos, and we actually end it with Toph actually being the one, I guess, to decide that, do you know what? The girls' day out at the spa actually is something I quite like. So I like that they kind of do that again, that it wasn't just a one-off, that actually, hey, part of the Katara-Toph dynamic is that actually, yeah, Katara is someone where Toph doesn't mind being kind of more girly around. That's nice for the dynamic, where a lot of times they play up the drama between these two a lot more. So I think this one, where they are on friendly terms for like most of it, is particularly nice. And again, in just 6 pages, there's actually a decent amount to this one, which I appreciate. Next, Ember Island Arcade, and yeah, this is probably one of the few ones in the book where I'm not a big fan of it. I think the art is not good, not great, and I just think the game that they have here, the Rock'em Sock'em robots basically that have Aang and Zuko in them, just to me doesn't really fit. It feels a little bit like too on the nose, where like I'm sure on a technology level it's not crazy, but it just feels like I'm not sure if this one was quite the idea, that you maybe should have thought about this one a little bit more, because I like the idea of expanding out the teens' time on Ember Island and like highlighting that other stuff happened in between the moments we saw in the episode during their vacation. But this specific one wasn't great, because even when you get into the story, it is just Azula and Zuko fighting on this arcade machine, and that's it. It's just the very basic dynamics played up, just with the gimmick of, you know, it's Zuko versus Aang in the arena type thing. That's it. Next, Monster Slayer, which is 10 pages, so it's a solid story here. Pretty good. You know, Sokka brags about being a Monster Slayer, but actually Appa is the one who's the MVP, taking charge against the Armadillo Bear, which is a super cool animal. Hopefully we get a page on that in Beast of the Four Nations. But yeah, I would say with this one, it's more of like, what this one kicks into gear when it turns into the Appa animal fight, and it feels like it's the sequel to Appa's Lost Days. The early stuff with just Sokka bragging is fine, but it's maybe not the strength of the comic overall. That's more of the leaning into the humor side of things. But yeah, cool to see Appa get the MVP treatment here. Next, Combustion Man on a Train. What a title, and actually a pretty good story. As you can see, it's in my top 10. 14 pages, so it gets the time that it needs, and I quite like this one. Yeah, I like that Combustion Man, like I praised like Relics for using Zhao again. I like that here's another incident with Combustion Man, and the fact that they set it on a train just creates a cool action set piece dynamic overall. But there's more to it than that. The dynamic of having the little girl character show, where Aang gets to show how nice and kind he is, trying to help her out on her first kind of solo train journey. But then the calming advice he gives her to basically meditate, she's able to give to the other passengers who haven't interacted with Aang, as Aang goes through the crazy fight with Combustion Man and Sokka stops the train. It's a fun comic that just gets a bit of everything. Like, there's good Aang character work here, there's good Sokka character work, and Sho is a fun one-off character, I think, as well. So, nice stuff there. Definitely one of the better comics, I think. In that, like, yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing another incident with Combustion Man done with at some point as well in one of these stories, but, you know, it is what it is. Next is sword bending, 6 pages, and in my mind, this is exactly how you do a 6-page story. That, like, it's just a simple idea of Sokka now has training from Piandao. How good is he compared to other people? Let's reveal Zuko was also trained by Piandao and have them fight against each other. How good is Zuko as a swordsman compared to where Sokka is currently? And that's really good because you have the initial important reveal of something we didn't really know before. Zuko trained under Piandao. That's how he's so good with the swords. And then you get the kind of notable reveal that Zuko is technically much better than Sokka, but Sokka's strength is his kind of ingenuity, as the episode Sokka's Master pointed out. So the only quote-unquote win he gets is the return of the boomerang, which is a nice reference to like episode 1. The kind of opening kind of 2-part episode, you know, that sort of idea. So yeah, sword bending, pretty nice and probably the best of the 6-page stories, but there are a couple of 6-page stories that are actually, I think, quite good. Like No Benders Allowed, also 6 pages. This one's super entertaining. It's lighthearted, but I think it's done in a pretty good way, where it's a lighthearted exploration of the kind of bender non-bender dynamic within the bigger team avatar you have at the Western Air Temple, where it's like, oh, you know, Sokka teaming up with like, Teo and all these others, you know, the Duke, as the benders go off to train just in case the non-benders get hurt. It's a fun little thing where they create their kind of No Benders Allowed club, and Aang is the one who desperately wants to get in there. And then, you know, it's a little bit like fast-paced right at the end, but I do like the idea that Aang finally is allowed in, and the others who were not interested in it the whole time are in there before he gets in there, which is, I think, just a nice kind of fun moment here. But yeah, they're done in the right way, I think. Entertaining, the right blend. And again, set at a nice point where, like, you actually get to see little moments of, like, you know, the Duke and Teo and stuff like that. And that's good. Next up, Love is a Battlefield. Also 6 pages. Team Guruhuru, once again, on art. I actually really like this one because I think it's a nice addition to the Katang dynamic in book 3, like just ahead of stuff like Emerald Island Players, of course. That, you know, highlighting that Aang is aware that Katara is avoiding discussing their relationship post the invasion case. I actually like that we actually get an adaptation of a scene, the kiss scene from the invasion in this one. That's cool to see it in a different art style here. And I just think it adds like a little bit of nuance, a little bit of extra development, just kind of highlighting that, you know, when we get to some of these kind of later scenes, there are these other scenes that have happened kind of before it. So I think it's pretty nicely done. I'm not usually the biggest fan of kind of relationship drama stuff, but I actually think this one works nicely with the other stuff that we get on the relationship. Next, Dragon Days, which again is part of my top 10. Fantastic. This might be one of, if not the best, kind of short stories in the book. Made unique by the fact that we get to finally meet the Kuzan. The name that we've heard so many times at this point. This is who actual Kuzan is. It's a Aang in Ice flashback from the previous generation, basically, which is very, very cool. Aang interacting with dragons prior to the Firebending Masters, so we get to meet this green dragon. They protect the dragon's egg from kind of poachers, basically. And even the kind of bookends on the story with the reason this story gets told is that it's Aang telling Zuko about it just after the Firebending Masters. And we get the idea that, oh, now Zuko knows why Aang says all the kind of crazy slang. That Kuzan was the one who was really, really into that kind of slang, which is kind of fun. And then, obviously, from the Reckoning of Roku now, we also maybe get the idea that Gyatso was the one who maybe seeded some of that slang within parts of the Fire Nation, and that's probably where Kuzan got it from, which is a kind of fun bringing it around kind of type dynamic. So yeah, I think this is a great short story. Next up, Game Time, which is one of the few Lost Adventures story that to me is just like, it's fine, moving on. Like, there's really very little to say about it. It's fun, but it's way too light on content. It's so basic. It's just, they play hide and seek, and it's like he just turns around the corner and it's Katara there as like a water spout, and it's like, okay, it's Appa behind a bush, okay. But it's just like, there's such a contrast. Like, I get it, there's a difference in page count between some of these books, but there's such a gulf in class between this one, which is way too light, compared to even Love is a Battlefield, which focuses in on a specific dynamic and does something with it. That idea. Next, this is the last proper story in Team Avatar Tales. Bumi vs. Toph Round 1, 10 pages. So with this one, I appreciate that they tackle this kind of fan discussion, which Bumi Toph is definitely one of the main ones that people have, because they're both, by different characters, considered to be the best earthbenders. And so, yeah, when they actually interact, how does that discussion actually go? They're both kind of prideful characters who do believe they are the best. How do they actually go when they actually have a fight against each other? Now, they frame it as a sparring match. They're not going to go crazy hard at each other, but we actually do get to see a little bit of that happening. Now, they settle on the idea that it is a draw here. The book is also done in such a way where they don't overly focus on the actual fight that they have. It's mostly happening off screen, causing a lot of chaos for the other characters. But Sokka accepts that it's a draw. The scenes that we do get to see definitely highlight that neither directly completely overpowers the other. So it's a somewhat even fight, and it's a discussion that's absolutely worth having. And I think it was always the way they were going to do it. I don't think a comic was ever going to answer a big fandom fantasy fight question like this. But it's nice for what it is. The banter between Bumi and Toph is actually quite good. The competitive kind of nature here. It's maybe just like slightly held back by the fact that they're not really going to commit to doing anything of particular substance here. But it's still a very fun story. And it's probably on the periphery of like maybe just about maybe getting into the top 10. If I was to knock one of the other ones out, this might be up next. That whole idea. Then we get into the two non-canon stories at the end of Lost Adventures. So the first one, New Recruits, is basically just a competition type thing. It's the results of like a fan character creation competition. It's non-canon because one of the characters is literally referred to as being a shadow bender, where they can manipulate their shadow. And that doesn't match up with any skill set any character actually has. Some of the other characters kind of make sense and they work. One of them being a cookie dough bender is a little bit like, okay, I guess that could technically work, but I think the way they maybe presented it was like, I don't think that's how bending works. It's not meant to really be anything you particularly discuss. They included it here just because it's art that was done. It was a comic that they could print. It's non-canon. It doesn't matter. It's fine for what it is. Then we have the Chibi comic, which is also non-canon because it's in the kind of Chibi-verse rather than the main continuity. Just a quick bit of Chibi craziness here. Gym teacher Kyoshi is very fun, and that's really it. It's along the same lines as the Chibi shorts. That's the way to kind of view it. And again, referencing one of the comics that I didn't cover here, that maybe I could have, the Aang's Unfreezing Day. This is how you do Chibi stories. Address the craziness and stuff like that. Don't just use it as an art style, but have a very plain story. Actually commit to it if you want to do chibi stuff. That whole idea. So that's Lost Adventures, and so we move straight into Team Avatar Tales. And again, you'll note the difference here. Lost Adventures, if we go all the way back up to the top, is from 2011. So all those comics are out by the time we get to 2011. Team Avatar Tales is 2019. Now, this book, again, is made up of 3 Free Comic Book Day reprints from the years quite prior to this, to the point where none of them are actually released particularly close to this book. But then the books that aren't Free Comic Book Day in here are kind of weird with Team Avatar Tales. I've never been a big fan of a lot of the non-Free Comic Book Day book ones here, but we'll get into it. So we start off with a reprint here, Free Comic Book Day here, Rebound, the first, typical Free Comic Book Day book for Avatar that we have. Very unique comic because they basically used this as a direct prequel, a direct lead-in to Smoke and Shadow, in that what happens here with Mei, like meeting Kalo, kind of properly introducing her father Ukano as a character, and also the concept of the new Ozai society. This is all kind of like new stuff. You read this book and then you go directly into Smoke and Shadow. That's a really clever use of one of these free comic book day books, something that they haven't really done since overall. And I like that it's a post-series comic, our first time really dealing with that so far in our list here. And so it actually progresses the plot and the character arcs, in that we get to see Mei post-series, post-breakup with Zuko as well, dealing with what comes next. And that's just very cool. I'm a big Mei fan. I think they do great work with her in the comics, starting with this through Smoke and Shadow and Ashes of the Academy more recently. So it's a plot that I really like, and this is kind of where it kind of started from. So that's interesting. Next, we get into our first non-free comic book day book for Team Avatar Tales, The Substitute. This one does very little for me. It's 8 pages, and I don't particularly think this one's super great. I think the art is nice, but wow, the comic is, the story itself is just, what were you thinking? It's Wang Fire without actually being Wang Fire, without any of the charm of some of those kind of dynamics that you had in like Private Fire, or stuff from the Headband, with the idea that like Aang goes to school. This is the kind of reverse of that, where Sokka inadvertently becomes a substitute teacher because of his disguise makes it look like a teacher kind of who's needed. It's just very he buys food. The food is actually what gets him in good with the students, and that's it. There's no takeaway. And for a 2019 comic, where I do think you have to have slightly bigger expectations for the comics where we are now, given that this is after basically all of the main run of the big comics, where you've had The Promise to Search the Rift, you've highlighted with a lot of the free comic book day books that came out prior to this, you can do big stuff with short stories. The Lost Adventures highlighted that even in 6, 8, 10 pages, you could do some impactful stuff, and this makes a decision to do barely anything. Because again, they've got a relatively low page count in Team Avatar Tales to fill out the rest of the book outside of the reprints. And I just think that they basically don't choose any particularly good story to do here. It's so weird. In that, like, this book was super heavily delayed as well. I'm not really sure production-wise what happened with this one. So it's an odd selection. We then get into Shells, the second kind of free comic book day book, proper one. So yeah, this one is really good. Perfect example of how to do a short story. Correct character selection with Sokka and Suki, plus a fun, nice new character that they get to kind of interact with there, that they kind of teach some stuff to. It is a fun scenario here, made even better by the brief bit of Kyoshi backstory to sort of hit the lesson home kind of hard as well. So this is how you do it. It's just you make sure that there's at least something of particular interest, and even if maybe the fan that's reading the book is not super into the Kyoshi backstory stuff, but why wouldn't you be? You still get Sakasuki, beloved characters that maybe don't get too much time together, interacting together. So really good stuff there. And again, it's Faith Erin Hicks on art in this one. So she's done her own graphic novels many times before, so it's cool to see her style of art on Avatar here, prior to her becoming who is now the main ATLA comic writer, which is kind of fun. Next is Sokka's Poem, 2-page comic. This is Jean Yang's first time on art, but not writing, which is kind of fun. 2-page comic, it's probably the right way to attempt to do a 2-page comic that's not just a random incident like a Be Calm. In that, like, it's just a poem, it's a montage to this incident where they fight the pirates, as we sort of present sort of Sokka's role in the group. It's kind of nice for what it is, but it's still only 2 pages, there's not much to say about it. Toph and the Boulder, 12 pages, and I think it's definitely the best of the non-free comic book day books in Team Avatar Tales. But I would still say it's not absolutely amazing. It's only kind of, I think, on par with a lot of the mid-range books from like Team Avatar Tales. You'll note I don't have it highlighted in yellow, so I don't think it's in the top 10. It's a fun dynamic. you know, they definitely choose kind of well here with the idea of we're going for a little bit of Earth Rumble stuff, Toph and the Boulder. Let's add in a bit of a new dynamic with the Boulder having this Croco cat, the Pebble, and then revealing that the Pebble has a baby, babies in the Pebblets. It's nice. They make use of the fact that this one is 12 pages, so it has the time to set things up and even have a bit of a kind of epilogue with the Toph and the Boulder having an Earth Rumble rematch with fans, you know, the Pebble and her children in the audience to cheer the Boulder on, even though he loses to Toph, of course. So it's very fun. It's just that I'm just, I think, amazed that the decision made with all of the non-free comic book day books in this one was to go pretty light-hearted and not like notable or important feeling like at all. Next is Origami, 6 pages. This one is nice. It's sincere. It at least tries to be a little bit more serious and not just straight away lean into to comedy and humor, which is the typical way you go with a really short story. But at the same time, it's also a little plain, and it is just about the gang meeting a girl who does origami, and it allows for Katara to give a little bit of a speech about hope at the end, and that's nice, but we've seen that before. And it's like, I like origami, but it doesn't really make for a great story on its own type thing. Sisters, the kind of last free comic book day book in Team Avatar Tales. I do have to say the art in Sisters is definitely on the weaker end of things from artists in this whole collection. I was shocked reading this book again that like, oh yeah, I forgot that the art I don't particularly think is super great by Carla Speed McNeil. It's not awful at all times, but it's just the construction of the characters' faces in particular is not fantastic. There's a couple of panels where Toph's chin, Ty Lee's face looks super long. One of the characters just looks odd. One of the newer characters looks odd in it. And it's a little bit unfortunate that, you know, this is the comic where we get to meet Ty Lee's sisters for basically like the only time. And it's in a comic where the art doesn't maybe do them the best service. But the book is held up by the fact that, hey, that's a super notable thing for Ty Lee. We finally get to meet her identical sisters, get introduced to them by name. We go back to the circus for a little bit. We have Ty Lee going through a little bit of a crisis of confidence of like, is the Kyoshi Warriors for me, or have I just done the same thing again? But then her sister meeting her sisters again helps her to realize that no, the Kyoshi Warriors is actually exactly what she needs. And then Toph is also in this one in a slightly interesting kind of character pair up where those two actually seem to get on reasonably well. And I wouldn't mind having more interaction of Toph and Ty Lee down the line just to get a bit of a better sense for their dynamic, because they're kind of very different characters to a certain degree. But yeah, it's an interesting one there. The Scarecrow, 12 pages. And this one is just a real disappointment for me, where like it's so many pages in the context of what these books are for such a nothing story. I have like nothing to say about this one like at all. And it just makes me go like, what were they thinking when they went like, okay, we're going to do a story collection. We're going to reprint Rebound, Shells, and Sisters, and then do a couple of other stories. Ideas for those other stories. Let's do, you know, Sokka as a substitute teacher. Let's do a 2-page poem about Sokka. Toph meets the Boulder. That's a good idea. They meet an origami girl and Sokka dresses up as a scarecrow. Something about pumpkins. Okay. And it's 2019? Like it's after you've done so many of the big comics, core comics have got going at this point. There's an expectation that these comics can do interesting stuff, and this is what you deliver. I'm amazed at how this happened. And the worst thing about it is that they kind of did the same thing for Patterns in Time, the short story collection for Korra. Is that again, it's some weird story choices, considering that The Lost Adventures is such a nice blend. Now, again, it's so many more pages long than Team Avatar Tales, but still, it feels like they didn't really learn anything from the fact that The Lost Adventures exists as a book. But anyway, then we get into the 3 not currently collected in any book, which might happen in the future. Again, I'm assuming if they're to follow a pattern, it'll be a Patterns in Time, Team Avatar Tales-esque book, where these 3 will get reprinted alongside a couple of other stories. Hopefully a better, higher quality batch of stories, but we'll have to wait and see. So yeah, from 2021 Free Comic Book Day, we have Matcha Makers, which is absolutely in my top 10. This is such a fun comic. It's about Iroh, but Iroh and the spirits, and just addressing that idea again, that like pre-Korra, like in ATLA era, we're addressing that Iroh can see the spirits, they're in his tea shop, and they are urging him to give this new romance with this kind of woman, Li Mei, I think it is, a chance. He feels he's too old for something like this to have this opportunity in his life, but the the spirits are the ones pushing him, manipulating him, being this kind of almost like chaotic force in his life, of like threatening him, of like, we'll break some of your stuff unless you kind of give this a chance. It's Iroh done in, I think, a very, very nice way. And I like that in like Bounty Hunter to Tiber, we see that he is in a relationship with Li Mei. This has kind of continued on from here. And I just think, yeah, this is a good idea to do something with the story, where it's like, it's actually progressing Iroh's character a little bit, but it's also bringing back an element of his character we rarely see discussed, the spirit aspect of him, especially post Korra, where we got a later in life, he is a spirit. Seeing that again was, I think, very cool, just to remind people about it. The 2023 free comic book was Lost and Found. And this one is just so forgettable. Like, to the point where, to this day, I do not remember seeing anyone online talk about this book anywhere outside of my video and podcast where I discussed this book, the comment section there. I've never seen anyone talk about this book ever. That's how forgettable it was at the time, and I think to a certain degree still is. It is a pretty bland comic. It's very basic, to the point. It's nice enough. It's sincere with what it's doing. It doesn't overly lean into the humor at all costs. It tries to keep it serious with this town that's been kind of hit quite hard. The new character who's introduced here, Lumi, is kind of fun, and the main thing that's actually good in this comic is just that it's really early on with Toph as part of the group, so it's like one of her first times where she shows the group a different side of herself, with the fact that she's the one who's able to kind of forge the connection with Lumi, who's been struggling with things. The answer they come to at the end of like the revelation about some of the stuff is kind of nice, but kind of feels like it immediately maybe needed a bit of a follow-up in the sense that, like, kind of almost like Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, you set up almost a student for Toph that we're never going to come back to. That's a little bit frustrating, but yeah, unfortunately not the right story, I think. Then we have this year's one, which again in a similar kind of fashion is baffling, but for like almost a different reason. The other one was basically, I think, aggressively plain for an Avatar story. There's no unique factor to it. This one, they almost went too far down the other path of making it like overly specific, overly unique, to the point where, why should I care about this story? Like, it's about samurai Appa and Ronin Momo, not actual Appa and Momo. They highlight that this is actually Sokka having the daydream of the characters that like Aang daydreamed about. But I think the biggest issue with this comic is that despite the art from Bel Bessa being fantastic, and I think I really want to stress that, the art is superb. The art actually in this one is really nice as well, plus this one. So the art in these 3 comics is great. It's just some of the story decisions that they make is weird. The biggest problem with this book is just that the story is really dull. Given that you have Daydream characters who basically don't actually exist, the story that they go through is so plain and by the numbers, it's actually startling. Like, how did you make it this dull by the numbers for these characters. Trying to, for the first time, I suppose, properly construct the world that those two odd characters inhabit. That's what you did. Wow. Again, art is fantastic. I would really love to see the artists on all three of these comics appear again. Do bigger books potentially going into the future. Do Korra books. But yeah, they've missed the mark, I think, the last kind of 2 times they've done Free Comic Book Day books. Kind of highlighting that, like, there's been ups and downs. Some of the, very small scale stories from Lost Adventures are a little bit like, oh, there's nothing here. Then there are some really strong ones. Then, of course, the main iteration of the comics happens in the early kind of 2010s, and they do some big stuff. But then you can see there's a little bit of a fall off as you go into like the early 2020s, and we're only, it feels like now, just kind of getting back up and running again type thing. But there's still weird decision-making stuff that happens that makes some of the books not as good as they could be. Covering some of the art thoughts, I covered some of this as we went through, but yeah, it's so cool getting to see some of Team Guru's early Avatar work prior to The Promise, of course. Johan Matt and Justin Ridge are the two really consistent artists on most of the Lost Adventures stories, and they just have a very clean, show-accurate art style that I'd love to see again. These are two characters, artists who have kind of worked on the show as well. And it's just fantastic to see their art, along with, like, little bits and pieces of, like, say, Joaquim Dos Santos did a little bit, and so on. Like I said, just there, the 3 newest Free Comic Book Day books, the 3 I just covered here, all have artists I would really, really be happy to see more from. Sarah Alphagé from Matcha Makers, Kelly and Nicole Matthews from Lost and Found, and of course Belle Bessa from Ramen Rumble. Amazing art. It's just unfortunate, I would say, with these two in particular, the stories aren't super great. And then I will say that the only art styles that didn't really do it for me were Corey Lewis, who did Reach for the Top and Ember Island Arcade. It's not that the art is just an absolute disaster, but I think the character construction is, thinking about, like, would I want this artist doing full 72-page comics? Probably not. I don't think it would work super well. That sort of idea. And then, yeah, unfortunately, Carla Speed McNeil for Sisters, where it kind of does feel like this story, yeah, I wish it had a bit of a different art style just to present, Ty Lee's sisters in a little bit of a better fashion. But overall, the short story collections, you have to say, are an overall success. It's a really nice selection of nearly 40 stories where, sure, immediately you take out a bunch of them because they're so short, there's not much to them. But once you do that, there's maybe 2, 3, 4 duds of stories, and everything else is either solid or actually quite good. And they actually cover quite a lot of ground. I do think in modern days we've kind of maybe moved away from overly focusing on short stories, whereas I would like to see maybe the short story collections be made a little bit more of a regular thing, just so we can get those Free Comic Book Day books reprinted a little bit more often. We can tell a few more stories, especially on the Korra side of things. I think there's a lot of very much open ground to cover. But I also would say, like, it feels like some of the creators maybe, or the people making the decisions about these comics, I think it feels like a lot of people need to read the Lost Adventures again, just to get a better sense for, like, these are some of the good stories. Like, do stuff like this, not so much like this. So that's basically everything I want to say here. Pretty happy with the way this video has gone. It's like we're just under an hour, and I've kind of gotten through basically like 40 stories. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts. What did you think about all the short stories here? Which are your favorites? Like, if you were to choose maybe your top 5 or top 10, like I have, which of the stories would you particularly choose out of them? Are there any opinions that I presented in this video that maybe you don't agree with? Are there specific stories that you actually liked that I didn't? Ones that I liked but you didn't? I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on a lot of that stuff. Yeah. And this lines up, I think, with most of my general opinions on, like, the Avatar comics kind of in general, which is that I think, broadly speaking, the Dark Horse Avatar comic collection, everything included, is very, very strong. There's only a handful of kind of weak kind of parts of it, and I think a lot of franchises would be very happy to have the comic lineup that we have. So I'll end on that thought. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.